This is the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Can I verify that the meeting was properly posted? Yes, it was. Okay. The next item is an opportunity for public comment. Our
Yes.
minutes are,
What was that?
Okay.
I'm trying to catch up with you. I'm having two conversations there.
We got it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I did.
When you were looking at me.
I was looking at you because.
so our first item up, I think I was talking about the order of minute approvals. So we will start. We are now at the section of our meeting where there is an opportunity for citizens to speak. We have one speaker tonight. Because there are 6 speakers or less, speakers will be notified at 3 minutes, but allowed up to 5 minutes to complete their comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your phone. Our first and only speaker is Paul Reese.
Good evening. I'm going to talk about the possible removal of North High School's swimming pool. My daughter's been swimming for 14 years. So I'm not ever trying to hurt the sport. I love this sport. I've been doing it since she was 2 years old. I've got a lot of time invested. I absolutely enjoy swimming. It is a blast watching these kids swim. But if you want to see the successful teams, they're not the small ones that linger on the sidelines that don't go anywhere. It's all the co-ops, the bigger teams that go places and do things. And I would assume by the way it looks, they have pretty much fun doing it. So one of the arguments made for keeping the pool was that there would be an 8 years, and I'm just going to go by what's said. I think it'd be sooner than that, but it would take 8 years before we saw savings. 8 years. So to a second grader, that might be a long time. But as a kid who has one in high school, that 8 years goes by like that. It is only 8 years. 8 years. I've been coming here for more than 5 minutes. So I came here long enough ago that we put in lights in all of our football stadiums. And we spent $750,000 to put lights in our football stadiums. Because we would have a savings. It would save us money. But not in 8 years, not in 16 years, not in 40 years, but in 75 years we would see a savings. So they justified doing it. For a 75-year savings, before we would see, will the last 75 years? I couldn't get an answer from anyone. But it was told that we wouldn't see a savings for 75 years. So to say 8 years is something that we can't do is absurd. But it is common that we do this in our general life. Make a small upfront investment so that we'll have more money down the line. I mean, I assume everyone in this room has done that. I think everyone here went to college, right? So you all put in some investment up front, hoping for something on the back end. That's just what we do. But when you say 8 years, it's this much savings. But from thereafter, it's this much. It's like the one-armed fisherman. You got to fish this big. Your savings are this much. They never cease. So it's not that you're ever going to stop saving. That savings keeps going. Now, I just also talked about the educational value in this, that we can do lifeguarding, that there's educational value in this. My daughter did the lifeguarding class. Her and 3 other students did it. So we get told we have a shortage in teachers. We got a class with 4 students in it. Really? We got a real shortage of
2
teachers.
minutes.
Because of the value in that she could have taken at Parks and Rec, they would have paid for her to do it. She could have got a job through doing it otherwise, and we still might be able to do it with North. Very little bit of the time is pool time. You could still do labs and go over to South and swim, because we're going to this block schedule, you even have bigger times in between, and you could probably do labs that way. I don't know for sure, but it's not a lot of the classes in the pool. So the other one is the team, how you break up the teams, and is there anything we're asking of North's swim team that we don't already ask of North's diving team? See, the diving team does not dive at North, so it automatically has to go to either South or West, and they alternate. So all 3 schools get together and they alternate. So those girls and boys, when boys swim team, they already have to travel. They never have a home meet, they never swim at home, they are not part of that pool. So we're not asking anything out of the unusual that we already don't ask of the diving team. And we don't say the diving team is lacking somehow because we're doing this. You know, and then the case comes to, why did we build South's pool? Why do we have the biggest pool in the state? Why was that venture made? No one in this room was here. And I know it from secondhand from people who were before me in swimming, said that the idea to building this was
30
so that we would have a
seconds.
co-op. So that we would have a place to put our teams, that we could put things together. It was also supposed to have a dive well, I believe, but that didn't get done. But why would you build such a monster, a monster, I don't want to use that word, but such an awesome pool, such a huge pool, the biggest one in the state, just for one high school team, when we have smaller ones all across the state that work just fine. So anyways, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Moving on to our action items for this evening, the first approval is the approval of minutes. We are aware that there is going to be a change, that the speakers from last meeting will be added and an addendum set. So if there are any other discussion items and/or approval, now would be the time. Dr. Piasek?
Can I just clarify, are you asking to approve before it's amended?
I think that is the amendment, right? She's going to add
have
the
it?
names of the public speakers.
Okay, so that's it.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So moved.
Mrs. Voigt?
I'll second it.
Okay. It is passed. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Okay, passes 5-0. Our next action item is the approval of vouchers. Did we have any questions this week?
We did have a few questions. The first was, under the elementary school, there was a total of 1.2 million. Are these payments for our 4K partners? And the answer is yes, in part. There was quite a large amount that was actually paid out to Montessori for their K-5 through 8th grade, and then the rest were our K-4 partners. And there are 9 partner, 4K partner locations. The Montessori payment that also came in was questioned, or that we made was also questioned. It was a payment for 240 students, K-5 through 8th grade, both for in-district students and open-enrolled students. And I had one other regarding the payment to Delzer Lithograph for $2,895. It was not for a newsletter, it was actually for the hallways, office signage here at Blair Administration. Are there any other questions?
Mrs. Voigt?
I had asked that question because I was wondering what the cost of the publication was, because this is a very, very impressive, one of the best I've ever seen from the district. And it's a lot longer than usual with 12 pages, I think it is. you know? So I'm sure the cost would be more than the usual four-page, you know, type of document that we've done in the past. So just as a future question, maybe, like what the cost of this publication was, because I think it was money well spent, whatever it is.
Certainly.
Okay. See no additional questions. Be looking for a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Tanya passes 5-0. Our next action item is policy 6151, returned checks. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, this is a recommendation from Neola to amend an existing policy, and it's not a significant amendment, but it's one that, I guess both of the policies on the agenda tonight, I'm not sure if it's a solution looking for a problem or if we really want to state our position as a district. This one would add the wording, parent or student may be charged, any cost charged by the district's banking institution for a return check. Right now, we don't handle that through policy, but when you approve the student fee schedule, there's a $15 charge. So we've handled it that way in the past. Quite honestly, NSF checks, the question I was asking you at the beginning, or asking Heather was, how many do we deal with a year? And it's about 25. So this isn't a huge problem. A lot of that's probably due to credit card payment and all the things. So I bring it forward because I have no objection to the policy change. We would just, on the student's fee schedule, just reference the policy instead of putting a dollar amount in there, or we can stay the way we have it now with $15 as part of that. So not a gigantic issue, but one that we thought we should bring forward.
Mr. Wad.
What is the current fee that the bank charges for?
I believe it's still $15, but I would have to double check that.
That's what the school district is charged? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I assume then that the account holder also gets charged by the.
I would assume that's the case, but I didn't verify that.
Mrs. Voigt.
I had never heard of the term outstanding-stale checks. And in the context here of returned, you know, like you referenced the not sufficient funds checks. I think the average person reading this would have a much better understanding of what it means if you just call it an NSF.
Or a return check. the way-
Just return check without
Right.
even adding, the just outstanding stale just seemed like a rather unique way to describe it.
Yeah, I can't imagine that we would submit checks to the bank that we've held for 6 months, because that's really effectively what you're saying is a stale check is.
Yeah. Now, the principal secretaries are well aware that, deposits are to be made within 24 to 48 hours, for a lot of reasons. But we don't let checks sit around. I can't remember that the last time that was actually an issue, so.
Dr. Piasek?
Couple things. So while the title has the reference to stale checks, there's nothing in the policy that actually speaks to them. So I would be okay with clarifying that maybe, or would like to maybe clarify that instead of putting that in the title when there's actually no guidance in the policy for what to do with it. And I assume that's referring to a check that we may have held outside of its valid period, which, or it's been backdated for some reason to make it invalid. So perhaps that needs to be addressed. I don't know if this is a super time-sensitive approval, but this policy itself, I think, is important to say that we're going to pass the fees associated with return checks back to the person who wrote the check. If it's backdated for some reason, making it stale, then that wouldn't be the district's responsibility. But if the district is holding a check or loses a check, then I think it is our responsibility. Whatever happens here in 6151, I think in the student fees, if it's $15, it's $15. So where this says may, I think it might be that the student fee schedule should reflect what that cost is. Or if it doesn't, then this policy needs to say that, current rates by the district's financial institution would supersede what's in the student fee schedule. Or we just leave it at 15 or 20 or 25, whatever we're seeing is normal coming from our bank. But I don't necessarily want to overcomplicate it in the student fee schedule. I think I'm okay with that being a number. But we need to be clear then if this supersedes what's in the fee schedule, then we should not, and there should be an asterisk in the fee schedule. But I think there's some inconsistencies here that apparently were there all along that we didn't pick up on. Unless we could try to just modify it here. It's not a
It's not.
super
But the
complicated
change that
thing.
Neola recommended is adding the outstanding stale checks versus just keeping it at return checks, which I think everybody understands. For the fact that we're seeing maybe 25 a year, I think this is a lot of time that we don't necessarily need to spend on it. I'd probably just strike outstanding stale,
I'm okay with that.
keep it at return checks. And then, yes, to Dr. Piasek's point, to make sure that we're aligning the student fees to the document so that all cases, it's kind of bridge, and then be done.
So with that, I think there's clarification then either probably in the policy, because we want the fee schedule to stand alone, right? That not to exceed maybe what's listed in the student fee schedule, or that the actual cost may exceed what's in the student fee schedule, just so that we're clear and consistent on how we handle it. And since we have to approve the student fee schedule every year,
Actually, I have it on next month's agenda, just out of
Yeah.
timing, normal timing.
that's going to keep us honest, right? Because we're going to look at that fee and we're going to say, oh, last year our bank increased it to $20 or $25. We need to increase this.
So, if you're all right, we could bring it back next month for a quick, what I would think would be a fairly quick approval. We could add that language.
Agree. I would not put a dollar in it. I would stick with how Dr. Piasek worded it, that fees not to exceed what is listed in the current approved student fee schedule. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, can someone clarify an assumption for me? So my assumption is when we put together the fee schedule, that item for return checks is based on what the bank is currently charging us for a return check. So we're somewhere in the school year, and for whatever reason, the bank decides to increase their cost to $20, right? I would assume in the past, we would have just then changed the dollar amount to 20 the next time the fee schedule came up, right? So at worst, in that scenario, assuming, say, 10 of the checks had a return fee, the district would be out $50 based on the current volume of return checks we're seeing. And I'm guessing we're seeing less checks used.
Yeah, more and more has gone electronic.
Yeah. To me, this seems like a silly change to make to the policy, and I don't see any need for it. For anyone in the district to be spending another minute changing the wording here, changing the wording in the fee schedule, I think the policy as written is fine, and we can just change the fee schedule at the point at which the bank changes theirs. And if the district should lose $50, $60 in the process, that's probably less than what we're gonna pay somebody to make the changes to the documents, bring it back before the board, have us debate it, pass it, insert it into the new. So, I mean, I'm fine either way, this just seems like kind of this.
Dr. Piasek?
I don't disagree with you, but I don't think that there's any consequence in having this sentence that's added, even though it's already in the fee schedule. And maybe just to move it along, since I agree with you that it's a lot of effort for a small thing, and I definitely don't want Darren to be taking it back to his team and trying to wordsmith it. why don't we just try to close it here?
I'm fine with that as well.
So I could make a suggestion, I think per Mrs. Kozlowski's recommended amendment, that we would strike the outstanding stale from the title, keep the additional sentence as it's written, and add to the end of it as reflected in the student fee schedule. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, fine with that.
It basically just, it doesn't add anything of substance, so I think we want to get it off
Yeah.
of the slate, but then I think it does indicate that we may charge that fee. But I think everybody's kind of agreeing that
Sounds good.
it's more work to
Agreed.
administratively chase it than it is the cost itself. Okay, so I'm moving to approve the policy 6151 with those stated amendments.
Mrs.
I'll
Voigt?
second it.
Okay. Tanya, it has been moved and seconded, so we would be voting on the amended version. All those in favor say aye.
Point of parliamentary procedure. Are we voting on the amendment first, or are we voting on the entire
Do
policy?
a friendly amendment, we can just move it forward, right?
Okay.
Unless there's any,
As amended.
yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't anything.
Okay, that's fine.
Person.
I just want to make sure I know what I'm voting on.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Passes 5-0. The next action item is Policy 6236, Community Services Fund. This is a new policy. Mr. Clark?
Yeah, this is a recommendation, again, from Neola on a new policy related to what can be, what Fund 80 can be used for. And this is another one where we've handled it before because DPI has a webpage that dedicated to telling us what this is for, and I've included the link for your review. So again, I don't know if this is a solution looking for a problem, or we want to really state our case or position on the use of Fund 80. We're pretty light on the use of Fund 80. Right now, the biggest thing in there is half of the SRO time, because there is a community component to the SRO program. Half a position in the bilingual department and the strings program and the library liaison. Those are the things we have in there now. So again, I bring it forward because I really don't, I'm not against the policy. I'm fine either way. The only thing that I give some pause to is you create a policy and DPI changes a couple rules. Are we going to be chasing DPI or not? But I can't tell you there's a lot of changes in what Fund 80 can be used for or not, but just some food for thought. So I really don't have a strong recommendation for you one way or the other.
I think it was interesting in going through what DPI puts on there. I would pay particular attention to the list of ineligible expenses, which, I was trying to think creative as to what additional ways that you could use this. And truly, any possible thing I could think of has to be run through Fund 10, the general fund. So I don't know from our standpoint if there is, unless, open it up to the other board members, if there's any other things that we would think to do that, but moving on to change the utilization that we're currently using, I'm not sure even where that would be. Mrs. Voigt?
This seems like it's adding with the last statement that the board must adopt a budget for Fund 80 expenditures, like that this becomes another thing we'd have to do.
And manage, and,
Right, and right now we incorporate it into the overall budget approval. We don't have a separate
Yep.
approval process for it.
And that probably would still be okay.
No one's ever questioned it, so. And the auditors do go through and look to see what's being coded in there, and ours is very consistent, so it's a very quick audit, but some districts are just more aggressive with Fund 80 than others.
Dr. Piasek?
I think is it fair to assume that approval for the Fund 80 expenditures is part of what we do annually when we approve the budget?
Yeah, everything else, right?
I think this adds some clarity that, before I was actively involved with the board, I didn't have a good understanding of what was coming in and out of Fund 80, and I think the things that we're putting there make sense.
Yeah, well, everything that we put in there, we voted on. It's not, I mean, it's not, I mean, I remember the SROs. That was a big,
You approve the strings, you approve the
Right.
SRO, and you approve the library liaison. The only
full
one,
board.
and at some point you approve the position of, I think it's community liaison, is it?
Yeah, right.
The patient, or the patient, the employee's title.
right? So, I mean, nothing's going into that fund that we are not approving anyway, on an individual basis. Everything out of that was approved individually by the board. So it's not like we're just grouping things together and just approving the budget for Fund 80. All that stuff was individually debated at the board level and approved.
Dr. Piasek.
Just one clarification is on item B. I just want to make sure that my interpretation of that is consistent with the intended meaning. Costs for any program or service whose schedule presents a significant barrier for age-appropriate school district resident to participate in the program or service. So this is a community member, whether or not a school, an enrolled student. Is that referring to potentially things that might happen during the day that would conflict with school?
That's what they're getting at. Like, one of the things about the Strings Academy is it's offered to any student, and we actually did I don't know if it was this board or some board, actually had us break it down, and we have non-SDW students, so you have to make it available to anyone to access
In the community.
in the community within reason. I mean, and all those programs we have in there, I think qualify and have passed muster with auditors and DPI.
Well, it is left to some interpretation because it says significant barrier. So it doesn't I just want to make sure that we're not working ourselves into something that can't be done.
Yeah, no, we discussed the pool. Remember when we discussed the pool, because we're supposed to have some sort of public swim time?
Oh, and we do have
discussed
that.
whether or not we were gonna put that in the community service fund because, it's a community.
Correct, and that was actually one of the questions within the DPI,
Yep.
use of pools, and it actually calls out, that says that is an ineligible expense because it's part of the district facilities, which means that it has to go through general.
Yes, that's why I didn't.
Yeah. I didn't see it, I mean, you can take this one of two ways. You can put a policy in place that we're essentially already following based on what we know, and then this opens up a different, can of worms as to other pieces. So we don't have to approve this. We can stand the way we are today. This is just another one of those recommendations from Neola, which I would think would be far more appropriate for those districts that are using it in a far more robust manner than we are. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so just to clarify. So the items identified A through D are already the rules as established for so this is just reiterating what law is already, correct?
Correct.
Is it common for us to create policy that restates that we're gonna do things according to the provisions laid out for it in DPI or?
Maybe I've just never had to do it, but DPI's always been the resource for this. I mean, DPI dictates numerous rules to us, and they're the go-to agency in the state of Wisconsin for the operations of public schools. So this is more of, the only thing I could see that the board would get out of this is by putting it in place, if a future board wanted to start piling costs into Fund 80, you would force them to really look at this because you've enacted it yourself, but my auditor is also going to come and do the exact same thing based on DPI's guidelines, whether it's student fees or all the other things that they give guidelines to. So, again, I don't have a strong recommendation because I could argue both ways.
Dr. Piasek?
I think that it's redundant. So I think it's really kind of bad practice in policy development to have requirements stated in different places if we feel like it's covered in our annual budget approval and our audit practices. So unless it's something new, and we have reference to 6590 elsewhere in our budget planning and budget approval policy. So I think it's redundant. I don't have a particular problem with it, other than I just don't know that it helps us. So I don't think we need it.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of tag on to that by saying, I also worry that it sets a precedent, that we suddenly start creating policy that echoes that which we are already governed by. I'm not sure that we necessarily want to open that door unless we see a specific benefit to this that hasn't been made clear to me yet, but perhaps there is.
Yeah, and that's why I included the link, just so you can see the synergy between the two. I mean, it's almost cut and paste.
Okay, so we don't need to take any action. We can say that we're not going to move forward, we're comfortable with where we're at. Either way, we would need to motion and move that forward. Or do we not? If we're not doing anything and keeping the status quo as to
I don't
current
believe any
practice?
motion
Yeah, you don't need a motion.
I don't think we need
just
to.
hangs out there.
The action is no action.
Okay. We are now moving into our discussion items. So the first up is the monthly budget report.
I'm building up this area, and I want to bring you first to the tax levy to show you that last month we did receive over $40 million, so about half of our levy for the year was received and has been recorded. That's really about the biggest item in the budget area. I do have a couple charts out there, and you can see that everything is pretty even, Stephen, with what was going on last year, both the month and the year-to-date at the same time. And so there's been no big swings of anything to bring to your attention. I also have out there the health and the dental, and am using IBNR to make sure that we are carrying forward our appropriate balances. And the system is down, so I forget what else I have out there.
Up to.
Yep. Okay. Are we all getting booted?
It just came back up.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, and then I included the investment report this month as well. That includes the percentages that we've been receiving on our invested money. And I think that was about it. So if there's something that you have questions on or that you would like to see in this section, please let me know, and I'd be happy to gather that information.
I can't see anything.
Literally.
Can get back to me. It's okay.
It's too bad our chief information officer isn't here to help.
But we are, the graphs were new, or new format. We are trying to make it more of a dashboard for you rather than, and we don't mind providing the details. It's simply running a report, but we reviewed it earlier, and we're right. One thing about schools is your spend kind of, it's the same year over year. So, and the revenue flow for aid and tax levy and all the larger items are the same. So if there is a red flag, there is something seriously wrong, but we didn't see anything unusual out there.
Any questions or comments? Dr. Piasek?
I think, like the claims and salaries and things year to date is really helpful, even when it's a percentage or two a percentage point or two off from what's projected. It just is helpful to kind of see how those trends go, and usually you're kind of right on target. That would be helpful to me. So if that's what you're kind of planning with the dashboards, is those trend lines and essentially where we're at. I think with a few hard-to-fill exceptions, staffing is what's anticipated, even including some of the normal flux over the course of a year. But obviously, there are times when we might see differences in those numbers. And so if that's part of what you're planning for the dashboard or for those regular monthly updates, that would be appreciated.
Some quick hitter thing, and obviously salaries and benefits is 75% of what we do, so, but that's what we're trying to develop is just, because I serve on the Y board and I love the charts and graphs. You know, you don't know the operations well enough to, but that's what we're shooting for, so we'll continue to build on that and keep bringing things back, and if you, as you like them, great, and if you say no, we don't mind some feedback as well, so.
Okay, moving on to our next discussion item, which is the budget projections that are hypothetically in the cloud right now.
I'll talk a little bit about process as I'm typing to try to sign in again. Every year we go through this process of developing a multi-year budget forecast. And I think it's important, and I know as a parent, I never knew what was going on in my kids' school, so I don't think the community should be watching me tonight on this. But I do think it's an important process we do go through. It's kind of the kickoff of really coming together and getting to work on the 24-25 fiscal year. So what's different this year a little bit is the first step in developing this forecast is we have to net out. Phase 3 of the CIP budget was $9 million, I forget the specific number. ESSER 3 is still out there, so the first process we went through is going out and pulling out all those one-time revenue and expense sources, because I'm not projecting Phase 3 for year after year after year. So we did go through that, and it'll be nice to get back to, as helpful as ESSER has been, we were talking today, that we would love to try to close that out by the end of this fiscal year, just to have a clean break. So we might code some things that maybe weren't directly approved by you as the board, but the way I look at it, you've approved Phase 3, you've included, the ESSER and HVAC. It's kind of this pool of stuff that's out there, whether it's coming from fund balance or ESSER. So we've been thinking, do we just close out ESSER with facility-related costs? But we don't have to do that, but it's just cleaner. So with that, we talked about the set of assumptions that were going to be used for the budget projection model. That's actually Baird's model, in case you're wondering how we get this. And hopefully I can sign in. Otherwise, we'll just talk numbers. Okay, so with that said, this year's, or the current biennial budget was very favorable to us, one of the better we've seen in terms of the level of funding. And that hit last year. This year, we're looking at another $325 per pupil. That's locked in. We know that to be true because we're in the second year of or entering into the second year of the biennial budget. But as we looked at the budget model, a lot of that money is simply funding inflation, whether it's compensation, employee compensation, whether it's salaries or whatever, whether it's the cost of busing, whether it's utilities. We knew we'd have a one-year reprieve. A lot of that funding that was granted to the district for this fiscal year, we used on one-time projects, namely the Phase 3 capital improvement projects that look to improve all three high schools' auditoriums, and then more specific projects at each as well. So we knew that we didn't want to bake into that funding ongoing costs. So I think we did a nice job with that. So the overall relationship between the growth in expenditures over the growth in revenue is still there. And Act 10 was no different when all those changes took place. There was a significant amount of savings, but over time, expenditures caught up with that savings. You're right back to having the same conversations, and those conversations, in that case, started about 5 or 6 years ago. So overall, I think we're in a decent place. We're going through cabinet discussions already about what next year could look like. We're factoring in a drop in resident enrollment of about 1.75%. It's a little higher than what we have been projecting, but there's a lot more competition for kids out there. And we saw it this past year where it came in worse than what we had projected, so I bumped it just slightly. We usually do 1.25%. I went to 1.75. So enrollment continues to be a critical issue because there's nothing telling us that our enrollment's going to be increasing anytime soon. So with all of that, we factored in a 5% increase in health insurance, and I always do that just as the benchmark conversation to get a projection done. And then we look at where we end up overall. The CPI number is known for teaching staff. Once that's done, we can do the calculation to get to kind of where we're going to be, and then the other groups just shadow that for the purpose of this projection. That doesn't mean that what's in this projection is what the board has to approve. This is just getting us to a place of, can we pay our bills or not, based on a set of assumptions that we all share. And then we will bring back any changes that might come from healthcare, or certainly the compensation adjustments would have to be all approved, if you remember doing that last year and the year before and several years before for Mr. McCaffrey, I guess. But so we're looking at a budget deficit as it stands today of about $1.3 million. But we don't know the staffing changes yet. We don't know the selection of the courses the high schoolers have taken. We've got preliminary numbers on the enrollment. So a lot of that deficit, as I have it laid out today, will be rectified by the HR department's normal right sizing of staff going forward, and we should have that data within the month, at least some preliminary. Added tweak this year is the change in the high school schedule. What does that end up impacting us when all is said and done? So I think we're in a fairly good position. But then we return the following year to a deficit of, about $4 million per year. One thing that's a little different, and I don't know if it'll stand, is the veto that the governor put in place last year gave us $325 on the revenue limit forever. Now, whether that's a dream or valid, I don't know, but we've baked it into our projection because that's what state law says right now. So that's been taken into consideration. So again, I think for next year, I think we're in a fairly good spot. But then I think the following year, we really might be having some tougher conversations than we've had the last, what would be 2 fiscal years by that time. And all of this is laid out in a beautiful handout that's attached in board docs for you to see.
Right here,
Yeah, the assumptions.
I printed it out.
I put the assumptions in there, the summary page from the Baird model. One thing I will preface, if you look at Fund 39 levy, I assumed a drop in the defeasance level. Remember, we got talking about, should we be pre-funding the payments and all of that? I just put a scenario when the tax levy projections going out. That's so hard to do because you don't know what your aid's going to be year to year. So don't take those numbers and say, oh, these look great or these look horrible, because one thing I can tell you, every one of those numbers is wrong. Because once we get into the real data at the time, but I don't see a lot of revenue limit growth in the future because of our declining enrollment. But I said that heading into this fiscal year, and then the state budget came out. So it is possible, but if it stays with $325 increase per pupil per year and we're losing 1.5% or some number around there, you're not going to see huge chunks of new revenue authority coming because it's a multiplier of the number of kids, resident kids you have, not just any kids. So that's my budget update, or projection.
It's back.
Oh. All right.
Mr. McCaffrey?
For student transportation, you have market rate increase. Is there such a thing as a market rate increase for transportation?
Well,
Sure.
the way it's going right now, literally, I had a phone call at 4:45 today talking about what the market rate is. So
Okay.
It's alive and well, the market.
It's a live one, but we don't know what the rate is.
No, but I've made some assumptions.
Okay, I got you. Worst case scenario or,
Based on the last proposal we made.
okay.
I'm still frozen, so I'm not sure.
Mrs. Voigt?
On the projection for 24, 25, it's a 4.12 CPI increase. What is it for this year in comparison?
Our bargain for next year is 4.12%
Okay,
for CPI.
okay, so that's the current negotiating rate is this 4.12?
Yes.
Okay,
That comes out in January-ish, and it's for the following fiscal year.
Dr. Piasek?
A couple of things. I was at the WASB Fall Legislative Meeting last fall, and there was a presentation on birth rate and enrollment in schools, not just public schools. Estimating approximately 7% reduction in school-age kids over the next 5 years. And districts like ours are going to have a disproportionate impact, just given the demographics of the district, where you've got families aging out of K-12, not a lot of new property developments, things like that, so, or at least in comparison to the ones around us. So that's something, whether 1.75 or 1 or 2.5 or whatever is the right number, I think we need to kind of anticipate that that's the reality of the world. That's just, I've said this many, many times, but there's no more kids coming. And the other thing is, looking at what we're looking at just at first blush with a $1.3 million gap, we've closed bigger gaps than that. So we're just getting started, and I think that's not a bad place to start. I think whatever assumptions go beyond the biennial budget with that per pupil rate, we shouldn't make any, because regardless of what was written into the approval, over time, that increment won't be enough. I mean, within 10 years, you'll have argument from, the same group that was excited about the 400-year approval, that it's insufficient just with inflation. So I don't think we should worry too much about what happens after that, because I think we still have an obligation to try to keep the costs as cost-effective, as low as possible, and make sure that we're taking care of our facilities and that we're investing in the things that are going to help get our kids a great outcome, whether it be college or career. So I think we're doing the right things. I think we've made a major investment in curriculum that it's at least going to hold us for 5 to 6 years with a lot of the new pieces that we've picked up. So we've taken a lot of things off the table that I think could be staring back at us over the next couple of years. We've got a little bit of room to figure that out. But I look at that number just thinking where we've been over the last couple of years, and at one point, I think we were looking at about a $9 million structural deficit, which obviously, taking advantage of what the biennial budget allowed us to do, helped us close some of that. But obviously, we need to keep paying people.
I've probably shared a document very similar to this to the last 8 or 9 versions of the School Board of Waukesha. And one other thing I should say, that's a projection assuming we do nothing.
Yeah.
We just roll everything forward, but we're doing changes constantly. So, I'm very comfortable heading into next year that we'll balance this budget. We're just doing our due diligence, and mainly that's going to come from fewer sections, fewer kids. It's a natural process we go, and in years past, we've just gone through that process because, first of all, I think you expect us to. But it's just the natural part of of our business. But it's really that trend line further out that, this is gonna be, it's kind of a saw blade. It's gonna be here, we're gonna take action, we're gonna bring it to here, and then but that revenue and expense growth variance or delta is always there. We're always fighting that. So it's just like this cut. And we've been at, like I said, I think the last 15 to 20 years, I've had this exact same conversation with every school board I've worked with. So it's not poor fiscal management, it's not anything really we could have done beyond, because districts around us. And I think we should look back, though, and give some kudos to the several boards that were here and sat here during COVID and everything, when districts were adding costs. When ESSER came out, I was petrified that 80% of that would be ongoing costs. And we really held our ground. I forget the percentage, but it's a small slice. So we really did a nice job with that. We looked at different ways to compensate our staffs and one-time money, because that was our strength. So we, just the stipends we've paid out, if we hadn't done that and just gave those in raises, this deficit would be like $3 or $4 million more than it is. So it's funny, my state organization is always, we want a predictable revenue flow, which is $325 forever, right? A lot of them added ongoing costs, and now they're trying to not only have ongoing, that predictability, but make up for those added ongoing costs that were added during the ESSER years. So it's interesting.
Agree. Any other questions? All right, good update. We are moving now into other business. Are there any recommendations for future committee meetings? Okay, seeing none, we do have a need to adjourn to executive session. I'd be looking for a motion to do so. Mr. McCaffrey?
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Second.
Okay, it was first and seconded. Honey, can you take the roll call, please?
Aye.
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 Okay, passes 5-0. We are adjourned.